You're listening to the Bare Metal Cyber Prepcast, created to help you succeed in your PMP certification journey. Learn more at baremetalcyber.com, where additional prepcasts, books, and training materials await. Let's get started. Conflict is inevitable in projects, especially when pressure is high and deliverables are tightly coupled with compliance expectations. A well-prepared project manager does not fear conflict but treats it as an opportunity to clarify expectations, strengthen alignment, and improve the reliability of outcomes. This scenario lab focuses on applying structured thinking to conflict resolution. The method is straightforward. First, summarize the conflict in plain terms. Second, identify the relevant artifacts that can serve as evidence. And third, facilitate an alignment session that uses those artifacts to reach agreement. By practicing this rhythm repeatedly, you will develop the reflex to manage conflict constructively rather than reactively. The case begins in a predictive project where a senior architect and a quality assurance lead are in disagreement. The architect insists that the system already meets the signed requirements, while the QA lead argues that the acceptance criteria are incomplete or ambiguous and that further testing is required. This conflict arises just 1 week before a critical milestone. Regulatory stakeholders are watching closely, and partial testing has already been completed. The tension is not only technical but political, because both professionals hold senior positions and carry influence. If the dispute is mishandled, the project risks both internal discord and external loss of credibility. Time pressure adds complexity. With a milestone approaching, every day spent debating acceptance criteria reduces the time available for actual testing and fixes. The regulator's visibility raises the stakes further. If disagreement results in inconsistent documentation or sudden rework, confidence in the team's ability to deliver may be shaken. For the project manager, this is a classic case of balancing speed with discipline. Cutting corners may seem appealing, but it often leads to further rework and loss of trust. The better approach is to address the conflict directly, using artifacts as neutral evidence that can guide the resolution. The artifacts mentioned in the scenario are crucial. The scope baseline contains the formal agreement about what was promised and to what standard. The requirements traceability matrix links each requirement to its design and test cases, showing whether all aspects are covered. The changelog provides a record of any recent updates or adjustments to scope. Finally, the test plan shows what evidence has already been gathered and what remains to be verified. These documents collectively provide the objective ground on which the dispute can be resolved. They are not just paperwork. They are the project's legal and professional memory. The best course of action for the project manager is to facilitate a structured working session where the architect and QA lead restate the acceptance criteria in their own words, and then reconcile those statements with the artifacts. By walking through the scope baseline and requirements traceability together, the team can identify whether the disagreement stems from ambiguity, omission, or interpretation. Once aligned, the test plan can be updated and testing resumed with clarity. This approach shows leadership, protects the milestone, and ensures regulatory confidence. Most importantly, it reframes the conflict away from personalities and toward evidence-based decision-making. Avoidance is a tempting but weak response. Reassigning the disputed test to another engineer might temporarily cool tempers, but it sidesteps the underlying problem: unclear or disputed acceptance criteria. A new tester cannot magically resolve ambiguity in the baseline or traceability documents. Without clarity, testing may continue in the wrong direction, wasting even more time. Avoidance often feels like progress in the moment, but it nearly always increases rework. In a compliance-heavy environment, it also weakens confidence because disputes resurface during audits or reviews. A professional project manager resists avoidance and instead addresses the conflict directly. Premature escalation is another poor alternative. Taking the disagreement immediately to the project sponsor may provide a fast ruling, but it undermines the autonomy of the team and burdens leadership with issues that should be resolved closer to the work. Escalation should only occur after all reasonable facilitation and artifact checks have been attempted. Sponsors expect their project managers to manage conflicts with evidence, not pass them upward as soon as disagreements arise. Escalating too soon also signals to the regulator that the team cannot resolve disputes internally, which can erode trust. The better approach is to escalate only with a documented artifact trail showing why intervention is necessary. Another flawed option is to unilaterally side with the QA lead in the name of protecting compliance. While appearing safe, this undermines the architect's authority and ignores the signed baseline. Regulators are reassured not by one voice prevailing but by evidence that aligns with agreements. Choosing one perspective without consulting artifacts risks creating scope creep and alienating stakeholders. It also sends the wrong message to the team that the loudest or most risk-averse voice wins, regardless of documented agreements. This kind of unilateralism might diffuse conflict quickly, but creates mistrust and sets a dangerous precedent for future disputes. The facilitated artifact review, by contrast, achieves multiple objectives at once. It gives both stakeholders a chance to voice their concerns, reinforces the importance of artifacts as the arbiter, and produces a shared understanding that can be recorded in the decision log. By updating the traceability and test plan accordingly, the project manager ensures that future teams and auditors see clear evidence of resolution. This approach balances timeliness with rigor. The milestone can still be met, but it will be achieved with defensible documentation rather than hurried compromises. It is the classic slow down to speed up strategy. The lesson here extends beyond predictive projects. In an agile environment, the same conflict might arise over acceptance criteria for a product backlog item. Instead of consulting a scope baseline or traceability matrix, the team would review the item's acceptance criteria alongside the definition of done. A brief backlog refinement or team huddle could replace the formal working session. The principle, however, is the same: clarify terms, consult the authoritative artifact, and align decisions with stakeholders. Agile or predictive, the answer is rarely to avoid, escalate, or appease. The disciplined use of artifacts is what resolves the conflict. In both predictive and agile contexts, pitfalls abound. A common mistake is rushing to re-baseline scope prematurely, which consumes time and introduces unnecessary change requests. Another is appeasing whichever role has more seniority or louder influence, which undermines fairness and weakens credibility. Skipping artifact checks entirely is also common, especially when under time pressure, but this leaves the project without defensible evidence. The heuristic that protects you in all these cases is simple: clarify the terms of the disagreement, verify the authoritative artifact, and then decide with the stakeholders present. This method is consistent, transparent, and reliable. From a broader lens, this case illustrates why project managers must be facilitators as much as planners. Technical experts often disagree, but it is the project manager's role to ensure disputes are resolved constructively and documented properly. By modeling neutrality and guiding stakeholders to artifacts, you demonstrate leadership that prioritizes clarity and compliance over ego. You also set a cultural precedent that conflicts are not won by authority or personality, but by alignment with agreed evidence. Over time, this builds trust across the team and reduces the frequency and intensity of future disputes. The importance of documentation cannot be overstated. In regulatory environments especially, decisions made under pressure must be traceable later. If the project manager resolves the dispute but fails to update the decision log or test plan, the team risks repeating the disagreement or facing challenges during audits. Good conflict resolution includes not only the facilitated discussion, but also the recorded outcome. This turns conflict resolution from an informal negotiation into a professional practice that strengthens the entire governance system. Artifacts, once updated, serve as proof that the project team handled conflict responsibly. The scenario also underscores the value of psychological safety. Both the architect and the QA lead must feel that their concerns were heard and considered. A facilitated session communicates that their voices matter, but that the final arbiter is the documented baseline, not individual authority. This reduces defensiveness and increases buy-in. If instead the project manager sides quickly with one party, the other is left feeling marginalized and may disengage. Psychological safety is not only about being polite, it is about ensuring that conflict leads to better outcomes because all perspectives were tested against evidence. In reflecting on this case, you can see the universal heuristic emerge. When conflict arises, clarify the disagreement in plain terms, consult the authoritative artifact, and align stakeholders through facilitation. Avoidance, premature escalation, and unilateral decisions all fail because they undermine either traceability, trust, or timeliness. By using artifacts as the anchor, the project manager diffuses tension and ensures the resolution is defensible. This pattern applies across predictive and agile contexts, across teams and vendors, and across milestones and iterations. It is one of the most practical, transferable skills a PMP can master. For more cyber-related content and books, please check out cyberauthor.me. Also, there are other prepcasts on cybersecurity and more at baremetalcyber.com. In our second scenario, we shift into an agile environment where the pressure comes not from regulators but from a product owner introducing new work mid-sprint. The team is already at full capacity, compliance testing is still underway, and the next sprint review is only a few days away. A tester raises concerns that this extra work will compromise testing and may even undermine the sprint goal. This kind of situation is common in agile teams, especially when business leaders feel a sense of urgency about new opportunities. The project manager, or scrum master in this context, must help resolve the tension without breaking cadence or quality. The artifacts in play here are slightly different. The sprint goal defines the purpose of the iteration, ensuring the team has a shared outcome. The sprint backlog represents the planned work and the team's capacity commitments. The definition of done describes the quality standard that cannot be compromised, including compliance checks. The impediment log records issues that block progress. When a product owner introduces new work mid-sprint, these artifacts serve as anchors for the discussion. The question is not whether the work is valuable, but whether introducing it now preserves cadence and honors the team's commitments. The best course of action is to protect the sprint goal and cadence. The new work should be redirected into the product backlog to be considered during the next sprint planning session, unless the team formally decides to swap out an existing item of lower value. That swap must be documented through backlog policies and done transparently with the team. By handling the request this way, the cadence of the sprint remains intact, the sprint goal is respected, and the definition of done is not compromised. It also reinforces to stakeholders that the sprint is not a free-for-all, but a time box with discipline. The lesson here is that team capacity and quality standards are not negotiable in the middle of a sprint. Business urgency must be balanced against the rhythm of delivery. By insisting that new work follow backlog policy and enter the next sprint, the project manager both respects the product owner's priorities and preserves team discipline. Over time, this builds stakeholder understanding that cadence is a safeguard, not a barrier. It ensures that changes are considered, prioritized, and introduced in a way that does not destabilize the team's delivery rhythm or erode trust in quality. Now consider a third scenario, one involving a vendor and an internal team locked in conflict over an interface specification. The vendor claims the interface control document was ambiguous and that this ambiguity explains their missed delivery. The internal team counters that the vendor missed critical integration meetings where clarifications were provided. The interface lies on the critical path, penalties apply if it is delayed, and communication channels between the two groups have become fragmented. This is a recipe for finger-pointing and defensiveness, which only deepens delays. The project manager must step in and restore alignment before the situation worsens. The artifacts available here include the statement of work, which defines contractual obligations, the interface control document that specifies design standards, the decision log that records clarifications, and the communications management plan. Each of these artifacts is essential for cutting through blame, If the vendor failed to attend meetings, that fact should appear in communications records. If the interface specification was unclear, clarifications should be documented in the decision log. By anchoring the discussion in these artifacts, the project manager moves the conversation away from accusations and toward evidence. The most effective approach is to facilitate a joint review session where both the vendor and the internal team walk through the interface control document line by line, using the statement of work and decision log to clarify ambiguities. The outcome of this session should be a reset cadence for integration work, updated documentation that captures the agreed clarifications, and clear owners with deadlines for the next steps. By handling the dispute this way, the project manager reinforces the principle that artifacts, not personalities, decide outcomes. It also creates a defensible trail of evidence for governance and, if needed, for contractual enforcement later. Moving straight to penalizing the vendor might satisfy some stakeholders in the short term, but risks alienating a partner who is still critical to project success. Adding a new vendor introduces ramp-up costs and almost always delays delivery further. Letting the two groups resolve the matter offline abdicates responsibility and all but guarantees that the conflict will resurface in another form. Facilitation anchored in artifacts is slower at first but much faster in the long run because it rebuilds a shared understanding and sets up a predictable cadence for moving forward. Conflict resolution at this level is about system repair, not blame. The key lesson from this scenario is that when external partners are involved, the project manager must act as the steward of both the relationship and the evidence. The relationship must be preserved because vendors often remain critical even after disputes. The evidence must be reinforced because without it, accountability collapses. By convening structured sessions that tie decisions back to contractual documents and logs, the project manager avoids personal bias and builds a defensible case for whatever escalation may come later. This balance preserves delivery while keeping governance satisfied that disputes are managed responsibly. Reflecting on these three cases, a common thread emerges. In each situation, the project manager's best response was to facilitate alignment using the relevant artifacts rather than avoiding conflict, escalating prematurely, or taking unilateral decisions. In predictive work, this meant returning to the scope baseline and traceability. In agile work, it meant honoring the sprint backlog, sprint goal, and definition of done. In vendor disputes, it meant relying on statements of work, interface control documents, and decision logs. Artifacts anchor decisions, reduce subjectivity, and protect the integrity of both cadence and governance. Another common lesson is that preserving cadence is often the hidden victory in conflict resolution. In the agile scenario, holding the sprint boundary taught stakeholders that responsiveness does not mean abandoning rhythm. In the vendor scenario, resetting the cadence for integration ensured that dependencies would be handled predictably. Even in the predictive dispute between architect and QA, preserving the milestone cadence mattered as much as resolving the acceptance criteria. When cadence is preserved, teams can plan, stakeholders can trust, and governance can oversee without micromanagement. This principle holds true across delivery methods. Exam scenarios are designed to test your ability to resist easy but flawed choices. Avoidance feels attractive when tempers run high, but it creates hidden risks. Escalation feels decisive, but it signals weakness if used too soon. Unilateralism feels efficient, but it undermines fairness and evidence. The right answer almost always involves facilitation, artifact review, and stakeholder alignment. This pattern demonstrates professional maturity, aligns with PMI's emphasis on evidence-based management, and creates sustainable outcomes. If you internalize this rhythm, you will recognize correct answers even when the exam dresses them in different details. Finally, remember that conflict resolution is not a mechanical process, but a leadership act. It requires the courage to face disputes head-on, the discipline to anchor them in evidence, and the empathy to ensure all voices are heard. By modeling this approach, project managers set a cultural tone that outlasts any single project. Teams learn that disagreement is not dangerous but productive when handled correctly. Vendors learn that accountability is real but fair. Stakeholders learn that cadence and evidence, not personalities, guide decisions. This is the essence of team alignment, creating systems where conflicts strengthen trust rather than weaken it. Thanks for tuning in to the Bare Metal Cyber Prepcast, your trusted source for cybersecurity news and insights. Remember to subscribe at baremetalcyber.com so you never miss an update. And visit cyberauthor.me for best-selling cybersecurity books that equip you with expert knowledge. Until next time, stay secure and stay vigilant.